In exercise 6F, we're looking at cubic graphs again, but this time our graphs are in factor form. So they're actually going to be in this form here, ax cubed plus bx squared plus c, and then factorised. Now that is not the same as the form that we've just looked at, point of inflection. So these graphs, when we are looking at them, if it is a positive cubic, it will look like that. If it's a negative cubic, then it will go the other way. The way I remember it is this last bit from the turning point is positive, and this last bit from the turning point is negative gradient. So they are pretty much the forms that we're going to be looking at. So let's have a look at these two, and you can see that this first one here will be a positive cubic. Why do we know it's a positive cubic? Because when we multiply the x's together, it will end up being a positive x cubed. So if it's a positive cubic, the trend is like that. Look back to up the top of our page. So that's our trend. And what do we know here? Well, you can see that we have got our x-intercepts already because it's in factor form. So when we let y equal 0, we get x equal to 1, x equal to negative 2, and x equal to negative 1. They are our three x-intercepts. Do we have a y-intercept? I think so. Okay, y-intercept, let x equal 0. Let's try that out. And you get y is equal to negative 1 times positive 2 times positive 1. Okay, because 0 take away 1 is minus 1. And when you multiply them all out, you get a negative 2. So that coordinate is 0, negative 2. Now we come to plot this graph. Let's plot our x-intercepts first. They are at negative 2, negative 1, and positive 1. And if you have a look up here, okay, at this point we don't know how to find the turning points of a cubic. So you don't have to find the turning points yet, but down the track we will have to. All right, the only other point we know there is when x is equal to 0, y is equal to negative 2. And we know that the trend has to look like this. So our graph needs to go between our x-intercepts, but it also needs to go down to our y-intercept. So we're going up like this, and we don't know how far we're going, okay? And then we're going down through our y-intercept and back up again. Now that's an approximate for that graph because again, those turning points we don't know. So this is not the turning point down here, that is your y-intercept. Make sure you label all those. So that is negative 2, 0. That one there is negative 1, 0. This one is 1, 0. And this point y-intercept is 0, negative 2. Okay, let's look at part B here. And again, let's start with the trend of this graph. Now you can see that here's a negative, and negative x squared times x is negative x cubed. So our graph, the trend of the graph, is going to be like that. Now, we've got our x-intercepts. So let's come up here. X-intercepts, we let y equal to 0. And so you've got 0 equals minus x squared outside of x minus 1. It's just the null factor law, just like what we did in part A. So minus x squared equals 0. So x is equal to 0. Plus or minus 0 is just 0. X minus 1 is 0. So x is equal to 1. So our x-intercepts are 0, 0 and 1, 0. What is our y-intercept here? Y-intercept, letting x equals 0. Again, we can't find turning points yet. We haven't got the background to do that, but we can find everything else. So letting x equal 0, you get y is equal to 0 outside of 0 minus 1, which is still 0, isn't it? So our y-intercept is 0, 0. Now the fact that I've really only got 2 points here isn't overly important because remember your x-intercept and your y-intercept are the same thing here. But because you've got this x squared, that means that at that particular value, which is this one, your graph is actually going to touch that point. So it actually has to touch the axes. So our graph is going to go around there like that for that one, and then it's going to go up and back and through. So it goes all the way up there. So it's actually touching at the x-axis because of the fact that we've got a square on that x value. So a lot of work involved here. We've got to find a factor first, then use long division, then get all the factors out, and then we can actually start sketching our graph. So P of 2 by trial and error, and of course I have trialed and errored it before you actually got there. So when I substitute 2 into that expression, I get 0. So that tells me that x minus 2 is a factor. Okay, so it is trial and error. There is no easy way out with that. So if x minus 2 is a factor, then I'm going to use long division there and substitute it in. So x minus 2 into x cubed plus 2x squared minus 5x minus 6. Okay, that goes in. How many times does x go into x cubed? It goes in x squared times. So we get x cubed minus 2x squared. So we've done this process quite a bit now. Subtract 2 plus 2 is 4x squared. Bring down the 5, so minus 5x. Ask yourself, how many times does x go into 4x squared? And the answer is 4x, so plus 4x. So 4x squared. And 4x times 2 is minus 8x. And of course subtract, and that cancels. Minus 5 plus 8 is 3. Bring down the last term, and of course we know we have to end up with 0, otherwise x minus 2 wasn't a factor. So let's see, times by 3, which gives you 3x minus 6, subtract, and we do end up with 0. Okay, so now what are our factors? We know that our factors are x minus 2, x squared plus 4x plus 3. Now they're not linear though, that second one's not linear. So x minus 2, and if we use our cross bridge method, 3 and 1. So our linear factors, y equals x minus 2, x plus 3, and x plus 1. All right, we're just about ready now to sketch the graph, or at least get some information about our graph. So let's get our x-intercepts and our y-intercepts. X-intercept, letting y equal 0. So this is the sketch part now because I've got the factors. Okay, the last one here is almost in factor form, but not quite. So we don't have to do as much work as what we did for part C. So we can tell a few things here before we start. We can see that it is a negative cubic. So the trend of my graph will look like that. All right. I know that I've got one factor of x minus 1, but I have to get the linear factors for this. So let's come over here and factorise that. So x squared plus 4x minus 5. Does that factorise nicely? Let's have a look. Factors of negative 5, which give you 4. So negative 5 times 1 would be a negative 4. So what about 5 and negative 1? 5 times negative 1 is negative 5, and 5 minus 1 is 4. So our factors there are x plus 5, x minus 1. So altogether our factors are x minus 1, x plus 5, and x minus 1. And we've got that minus sign out the front as well, don't we? So that's y equals minus that. So that's now fully factorised, which means we can set about trying to sketch this graph. So again, let's think about how we might sketch it. So we'll talk about the trend to start off with. And because of that negative sign there, it means that the graph is going to be upside down again, so up like that. What else do we know? Well, we know the x-intercepts because we've just found them by factorising. So x-intercepts let y equal to 0. So you get x minus 1 equal to 0, which means x equals to 1. You get x plus 5 equal to 0, x equal to minus 5, x minus 1 equal to 0, x equal to 1. Now we've got a repeated factor there, which means that our graph is going to touch at that point. We'll come back to that in a minute. Let's find our y-intercepts, and we are going to let x equal to 0. And so we get y is equal to minus 0 minus 1 is minus 1, and then 0 plus 5 is 5. Remember, we're looking at the factor form here, and 0 minus 1 is minus 1. And so now be careful with all your signs. Minus 1 times minus 1 is positive 1, times 5 is 5, and altogether gives you a minus 5. So your coordinate there is 0, negative 5. Okay, so I've labelled my axes, and I've gone up in a scale of 1 and across in a scale of 1. And now I'm going to plot my points. So when x is 0, y is negative 5 is my y-intercept. And again, remember, we do not know our turning points, so we don't really know how far down to go at this point, but we will learn that down the track. X equal to 1, so that coordinate was 1, 0, which is here. Okay, x equal to minus 5, so that's minus 5, 0. Now remember, we talked about the fact that this one is a repeated factor, which means that our graph is going to touch at that point. And still, we want the trend of the graph to look like that. So we've got to put all of that together. So if our graph touches at that point, that's the last point, it's going to go down that way, and has to go down and through our graph like that. All right, again, I don't know how far my graph would have gone down there. Okay, and it's not looking particularly nice, but you can make sure that it looks good when you actually draw it. So if I was doing a nice smooth graph, it would go like that. Please make sure that you are doing that, okay? Don't follow my lead. All right, so that is sketching graphs when they are in general form. We have to make sure that we get them into factor form before we can sketch them.